HP Lion Pride Finale Part. In lieu of going to dinner, Harry's four friends had all decided to go to the library to study. With the desperate hope that by preparing for their exams their minds would be far too occupied to think of their friend, and time would fly by. They were fools. Daphne slammed the book she had been not reading, and grabbed two fistfuls of her dark hair, trying desperately not to start sobbing. She felt Tracy's hand on her shoulder, trying to ease her worry. All she could think of was Harry and what he might be encountering. She was getting more and more angry at herself for not even trying to ask if she could accompany them. What made it worse was that she knew she wasn't alone. "I'm going to kill Dumbledore if anything happens to Harry. If he even catches a stupid cold, I'm going to stick my wand straight up that old codger's. We get it?" Hermione snapped, mirroring Daphne's feeling of helplessness. The bushy-haired witch began looking around them, making sure no one was paying attention to their conversation. "We're all worried about Harry, but we also all knew that this was going to happen. He's been laking about it for weeks. We just have to try our best to remain patient." Daphne could see Hermione's eyes were quite watery, as if she too were fighting the urge to cry in frustration. "I wish we could have gone with them," Neville whispered. "We should be with him. This doesn't feel right." "You've been saying that all day," Hermione said, turning to her boyfriend. "Ever since breakfast, you've been saying that you've had a really bad feeling." "I've noticed that, too," Tracy said, looking at Neville. "You've had this really strange look on your face, and you've been kind of jumpy. It's like you're expecting something to happen." Neville shrugged, and sat up a bit straighter in his seat. "I had this weird dream last night, and it's had me kind of anxious all day," he admitted. "What was it?" Daphne asked, hoping to get her mind off Harry's absence. "There was fighting. Here at Hogwarts. And this man, who I swear I knew, was cutting down anyone who got in his way to get at me. Like I was his sole focus. It's so nice you don't have a persecution complex, or a big head or something, Nevada." Tracy smirked. "What did he look like?" Hermione asked, ignoring Tracy's attempt at a joke. She felt her anxiety over Harry switching to Neville. His look of confused trepidation had her on the edge now. "I can't remember now. I've been trying, you know, hoping I might recognize him or something. But I just can't. I don't know why, but I can't shake the feeling that something really bad is about to happen." "Do you think it might be Rudolphus Lestrange?" Tracy asked, closing her own book. "I mean, you did kill his wife. If anyone had a reason to want revenge, it would be him." Neville looked thoughtful for a moment before he agreed. "I guess so. And it's not like he can just call me out, and challenge me. He's still wanted by the Ministry." Neville shrugged. "Okay, we all need to stop this right now," Hermione said. "We're just making things worse. Harry's going to be fine. He and Dumbledore are going to do what they have to do, and they'll come right back, and Daphne will snog his brains out and we'll all laugh about how silly we were being." "Hermione's right." Tracy nodded firmly. "This isn't doing any of us any good. Harry will be." Boom. Every voice in the library went quiet as they heard and felt the castle shake under the thunderclap. Every single head turned towards the entrance to the library, anxiously awaiting for something to come bursting through the doors. Someone did. Professor McGonagall, looking terrified, burst in the library, shouting for Madame Pants to begin helping students get to the emergency exits. The old crone rushed to the library doors, wand in her hand. "All students, drop what you are doing and follow me at once." There were a lot of books dropped, and frightened questions being shouted to McGonagall, who ignored them all, looking at each and every face, searching for someone in particular, it seemed. Neville had gone very white as he stood up, and unsheathed his wand. He couldn't shake the feeling that the very dream he had just described to his three friends was about to come true, and he was not going to be able to stop it. Hermione, Tracy, and Daphne followed his example, all taking out their wands, and preparing themselves for a fight. But before they could move, Professor McGonagall had stepped in front of them. "I have been looking for you since dinner. You must follow me, and stay close," she said, looking at other students who were heading for the exit. "Professor, what's going on?" Hermione asked, her voice shaking. Neville noticed and glanced at her, and had to smile. Despite her obvious fear, her shoulders were set, and she looked ready for a fight. "Death Eaters have entered the castle," the stern professor said quickly. "I am to take you to Professor Dumbledore's office. I don't know what is supposed to happen after that," he would not say. "But he's gone," Daphne said quickly. "He and Harry left hours ago." "There is no time to discuss it," McGonagall said, turning on her heel. "Stay close, and keep your wands out." The 14s didn't try to question the Gryffindor head of house any further. The library was now empty, as Madame Pans had hurried them all out and was likely on their way to one of the emergency exits McGonagall had mentioned. With McGonagall leading them, Daphne and the others began making their way towards the headmaster's office. Once they had left the library, they could hear what must be something close to what hell sounded like. There were screams, and the sounds of fighting somewhere below them. Neville's first urge was to run down the stairs and try and help, but Hermione's hand on his arm kept him at her side. "Professor, what's happening with all the other students?" Neville asked. "There are 4 passages that lead to Hogsmeade, each of them are near one of the school houses. The students are being led to those passages. From there, they will be able to flee home, or in the case of Muggleborns, to a safe location where their parents may come and get them." Daphne gave a small sigh. Astoria was likely on her way home now. McGonagall and her young charges rounded a corner, heading for the stairs, when 2 Death Eaters appeared at the other end of the corridor. There was hardly time for a breath when McGonagall and the 2 Death Eaters raised their wands. Diffindo. Protego. Confundos. Both the Death Eaters' spells smashed into McGonagall's shield, shattering it. Neville and Tracy rolled from behind the Transfiguration teacher, each blasting the Death Eaters, while Daphne and Hermione helped McGonagall back to her feet. She had stumbled under the force of the Death Eater's spell work. Neville hit the first Death Eater in the chest with a bludgeoning hex, knocking him 20 feet down the hall to crash into a suit of armor. Tracy only managed to graze the second with a cutting curse, which ripped the man's hood off. The Death Eater didn't stay, and disappeared around the corner, but not before Neville and Tracy got a good look at him. "Goyle?" Tracy asked in awe. "Voldemort let Goyle into the Death Eaters." "What?" Daphne asked in utter disbelief. "Then, I guess the one I got would be Crabbe," Neville said, watching them to make sure no one else got the drop on them. "Still, that was a powerful Diffindo he fired," he admitted begrudgingly. "Indeed, it was. This way," McGonagall said as she began leading them again. The screams were getting louder as they got to the stairs. McGonagall stopped just short of descending the staircase, trying to decide what the wisest course would be. Dumbledore had been very adamant about what should happen to the 4 young people she was leading. He wanted them in his office if anything should happen. She was sworn to making sure they arrived safely. She turned to the 4 and shook her head. "We're going to have to go another way," she said, and began leading them back the way they had come. The 4 teens didn't bother trying to ask, but followed their teacher as quickly as she was leading them. 2 long corridors and a staircase later, Neville and the girls found themselves on the 5th floor. McGonagall seemed to be very frightened, as she had gone very pale. They had not met any more resistance, but had heard more than a few explosions during their exodus. Daphne's head was spinning. There were so many questions to be asked, and she knew that this wasn't the time, nor was she sure that McGonagall had any answers for her. She wished over and over again that Harry were here, or that she knew for sure that her younger sister was safe. And then it hit her. Or rather, something really solid hit her. Daphne found herself on her side, with someone's hand in her face. There were squeaks, and groans of pain, as several people tried to get out of the unintentional tangle of bodies on the stone floor. Daphne. Tori. Oh, thank the gods. Daphne said, hugging her younger sister tightly. What is going on? Why aren't you 3 at the emergency exits? McGonagall asked. We got separated from a bunch of other kids that Professor Sprout was leading. Astoria said. 4 Death Eaters blasted apart the Charms corridor, and we had to run the other way. Are any of you hurt? Tracy asked, helping one of the other girls to her feet. Gretchen and I are okay, but I think Tabby hurt her leg. Astoria said, pointing to the girl who Neville was helping up. Can you walk, Miss Graham? McGonagall asked. The girl nodded, tears in her hazel eyes. McGonagall nodded, and beckoned them all to follow her once again. She figured she could make an emergency porte-carte for the 3 stragglers once they reached the headmaster's office. As they hurried along, McGonagall spoke over her shoulder. It is imperative that you reach the headmaster's office. Should we get separated, please do your best to get there at once. The password is Jelly Belly. You're not serious? Hermione stared at her favorite teacher. That's not really the password, is it? You know the headmaster and his sweet tooth. McGonagall said, waving the students back as she approached another corner. She peered around for a moment, to make sure they were clear, before leading them on. It was another few minutes of racing down corridors, and halting at corners, bustling downstairs, and through passageways before they confronted anyone again. Professor McGonagall was starting to feel that they might make it without any further obstruction, when a section of wall just ahead of her blasted outward. Dust filled the air, making it very difficult to see anything, much less breath. Neville and the girls fell to the ground instinctively, as they had been training to do since last summer. It was a good thing, too, because almost at once, several spells shot out of the dust cloud, and passed over their heads. Neville and the others all fired in return, and sought cover. The dust began to clear, mostly due to one of their adversaries, banishing the cloud to get a better view of their opposition. There were 6 of them, all adults, given their size. Neville and Hermione were huddled together in a tiny alcove. There was barely room for both of them to squeeze in to keep from being hit by a volley of spells the Death Eaters flung at them. Fortunately, Daphne and McGonagall got their attentions, giving Hermione time to run to where Tracy was keeping the 3 additions covered behind a large pillar. Neville was beginning to get angry now. He fired spell after curse after hex, only to have those damned idiots in black robes duck, weave, and shield themselves. To make things worse, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. It was as if this was some sort of big game to them now. 2 of the Death Eaters were focusing on Hermione and Tracy, as well as the 3 girls they were trying to protect. The 2 girls were doing some truly admirable shield work. As one's would break under the onslaught, the other would cast a new one. McGonagall was proving to be a force to be reckoned with, as two of the Death Eaters were struggling to keep the woman pinned down. It was almost artistic the way the woman wove her spells together. It would have been more impressive if she managed to hit one of the blighters. That left two for Neville and Daphne to contend with. The corridor was filling with smoke and dust again as spells blasted into walls and the stone floor. There was a shriek of pain, and Neville turned just as Tracy called out Hermione's name. It appeared as if Hermione had been hit by something, and had slumped against Tracy, who couldn't hold her shield up, and keep Hermione from falling to the floor. Fortunately, it appeared that Astoria had gotten a shield up. Seeing Hermione with her eyes closed, and limp in Tracy's arms was too much for Neville. He leapt out of the alcove he was hiding behind, sending a severing hex at one of the Death Eaters. It connected, taking the man's leg, just below the knee. The Death Eater fell to the floor, screaming in agony, and clutching his bloody stump. "Get that bastard!" he screamed to his fellows, who all turned their focus on the last Longbottom. Neville had no time for a follow-up curse, and instead conjured a wall of marble as 5 purple curses streaked towards him. Neville felt his wall shake on their impacts. "Get Hermione, and let's get out of here," Neville shouted. Daphne nodded and scrambled towards the fallen witch. "She was just stunned," Tracy said. "One of those jerks caught us between shields." Daphne revived her friend, and with Tracy's help got her on her feet again. Hermione looked shaken, but she took her wand back from Daphne, and they were off again, following McGonagall back the way they'd just come. Tracy and Neville brought up the rear, making sure that the 3 younger girls managed to keep up. Neville was about to say something to Tracy, when suddenly the world began spinning, and he felt as if the wind were knocked out of him. Dust was choking him, and his ears rang loudly. Coughing and spitting, Neville got shakily to his knees, when he felt someone grab him, and haul him up to his feet, before slamming him bodily into a wall. "I've been looking all over for you, Longbottom," the man snarled, his masked face inches from Neville's. Neville realized suddenly that his wand was no longer in his hand anymore. He had a moment of real panic before his mind pushed away any fear, and he began to assess his situation. "Lose something?" the man growled, holding up Neville's wand. "So did I. My brother's wife." The man took off his mask to reveal a grizzled, scarred face. One that Neville recognized at once. "Oh, Rodolphus is going to owe me big time for not killing you myself." Robespierre Lestrange grinned manically as he once again slammed Neville into the wall. Neville's head was spinning from being hit against the cold stone of the castle's walls. But he had no trouble realizing he was in a very bad predicament. He was without his wand, but thanks to Mad Eye's training, he was not without defense. He saw that the other Death Eaters had gone after the others, which left him alone with Robespierre Lestrange. That would make things a lot easier, Neville realized. While Robespierre was gloating over his success, he failed to notice Neville slipping his hand into his pocket. He had to be as subtle as possible, or this would not go the way he needed it to. "You know," she squealed like a pig. Neville began to chuckle, hoping to keep his enemy's attention on his face. "What did you say?" Rabastian's smile melted off his face. "What the fuck did you say, you little prick?" Neville began to chuckle harder as his hand slipped out of his pocket grasping a small dagger. "I said your sister-in-law squealed like a pig when I stuck her." It was pretty pathetic. Big bad Bellatrix, squealing like a common fat sow. "I'll show you pathetic, boy." Robespierre snarled, raising Neville's own wand to aim it right into the boy's face. Neville didn't hesitate. There was no inner conflict. Not even a moment to take a breath. Only cold hard survival instinct. Neville clutched the dagger tightly in his hand and shoved it hard and deep into the Death Eater's throat. Rabastian's eyes bulged as blood began to pour out of the wound onto his robes, and into his lungs. Choking and coughing, Robastien dropped Neville's wand, and began backing away. Neville bent over to pluck up his wand, keeping his eye on the dying Lestrange. He guessed that he'd managed to cut an artery, given the amount of blood that was spilling from the wound. It was all over in a few seconds. Robastien Lestrange lay dead, slumped against the wall. Hearing Death Eaters coming towards him, Neville pocketed the dagger again, and took off in the direction he'd originally been heading in. He had no idea where the others were, so he had to pause a moment to get his bearings, and figure out the quickest way to the headmaster's office. He knew that's where Hermione would be heading, and he was not about to keeping the love of his life waiting for him any longer than he needed to. And if he happened into any more of Voldemort's errand boys? McGonagall had her hands full now. It was taking all of her strength to keep Hermione Granger, easily the most rational young woman she had ever met in all her long years, from running back to where they had lost Neville Longbottom. The girl was frantic, and neither of her two friends could get her to calm down. "He'll be fine. With you as a girlfriend, I'm sure he knows as many spells as Dumbledore by now," Tracy kept repeating. But Hermione would only scream and fight against the hands that were pulling her away from her boyfriend. Both Daphne and Tracy were becoming very tired from fighting Hermione down the hall. "Maybe we should stun her," Astoria suggested, looking very fearful as they moved as quickly as they could through the castle trying to avoid any other Death Eaters. "Miss Granger, if you do not calm down, I will stun you myself." "I need to get Neville," Hermione shouted. "He's hurt, and I need to." There was a loud crack, and Hermione her face stinging from where Daphne had slapped her. "If you go running back there, you're going to get yourself killed, and Neville would be extremely angry, and wind up getting himself killed. Neville is very powerful, and the only thing on his mind is getting back to you," Daphne shouted at the gobsmacked girl before her. "You want to help him, we need to get to Dumbledore's office. That's exactly where he's going, and we don't want to keep him waiting." Finally, they had gotten through to the hysterical bookworm. Tears streaming down her face, she nodded slowly, and they were able to move much faster once again. McGonagall led them up some stairs, hidden behind a large portrait of a one-eyed witch, and through a long corridor that looked as if there had been some fighting recently. The Transfiguration teacher was beginning to worry that her fellow teachers were not having an easy time of things, and hoped that they were managing to get students out of the castle. Her momentary lapse in focus cost her. They rounded a corner, and found themselves standing before a large group of Death Eaters, who were rounding up stray students, and confiscating their wands. There was a strange moment where McGonagall and the teens looked at the Death Eaters, while they stared back, as if everyone's mind took a vacation for a moment. And then, everything speed up. "Run!" McGonagall shouted, as the Death Eaters began firing spells. Daphne clutched Hermione's hand, and began leading her away from the battle, looking back to see Tracy clutching Astoria, and running right behind her. The two other girls were keeping pace, as well. "We've got to get to Dumbledore's office, now!" Daphne screamed as she pulled Hermione back through the passageway they had just come from. When they re-emerged on the fourth floor again, Hermione took the lead, taking Daphne down another set of stairs, and through a series of twists and turns and long corridors. They were sprinting as fast as they could run, not bothering to look back anymore, until they heard another explosion, and several shrieks of terror. Hermione skidded to a halt, and Daphne nearly fell on her face from her momentum. They turned to see a large chunk of the wall had been blasted apart and there was a huge cloud of dust blocking their view of Tracy, Astoria, and the other girls. They could also hear chunks of rock falling from the ceiling and crashing upon the floor. Tori! Daphne shouted, involuntarily starting to walk back towards the devastation. Get going! Tracy's voice shouted to them. We're right behind you, just go. We're not leaving without you, Hermione said, beginning to head back for her friend. Bomarda! Came an unknown voice, followed by a loud smacking sound. Get out of here! We're coming! Tracy shouted, as someone screamed in pain, and several spells flew through the dust and smoke at them. No! Daphne screamed, raising her wand. Daphne, go! Astoria screamed from somewhere deep in the rubble and confusion. Hermione clasped her friend's hand and began dragging her way. Daphne only gave a little resistance before allowing Hermione to lead her on. The two girls ran for all they were worth now, both had tears streaming down their faces now. They flew through the castle as fast as their feet could carry them, determined to make it to the headmaster's office, as McGonagall had told them to do. Hearts pounding, and lungs burning, they took a few hidden passages, slinking carefully in open corridors, and flying downstairs, until they were only 2 corridors away from their destination. They took a moment to stop and try and catch their breath. Panting, and doubling over, neither of them could remember being this exhausted from running since they had begun their physical training so long ago. How far are we? Daphne asked through gasps of air. Not far now, Hermione said, feeling the world spin around her from running. Should we wait and see if Tracy and Tori catch up? Should we go back and help them? Hermione shook her head emphatically. If we get caught, they'll just use us to get to Harry. He won't hesitate to come after us, and they'll kill us before he even has a chance to do anything. Daphne hated to admit it, but her friend was right. Still, her heart broke under the conflict she felt. Her sister, and the girl who'd been her friend for as long as she could remember were likely fighting for their lives. She had every confidence that Tracy, and even Astoria would put up an epic fight, but Daphne had no idea if they would get out of that mess. She wanted to go back and help them, but she knew that Hermione spoke the truth. They were nothing more than bait to get to Harry, and no one could afford for Harry to be killed. They heard footsteps coming closer and they each tensed up. Both girls clutched their wands tighter, and taking great gulps of air, nodded at each other, and as one, jumped around the corner, prepared to take out any Death Eaters who had dared try and capture them. Whoa! Neville shouted, holding up his hands. It's me. It's only me. He was quite dirty, and his robe was torn in a few places, and the girls could smell the distinct odor of burnt cloth. Neville! Hermione shouted, jumping into her boyfriend's arms. I thought. I'm okay, but we need to move. There's a few tossers after me, and they're not far behind. Daphne grabbed the back of Hermione's robes, and they all began running again. Neville, being the fastest of the 3 at the moment, led the way, holding 2 wands. He had snatched one off a Death Eater he had managed to trounce with a rather inventive use of a shrinking spell. He had no idea why that spell popped into his mind, but he knew he would laugh about the incredibly shrinking waist of that man. Thousands of diet jokes kept popping into his mind whenever he thought about it, and he could not stop smiling. There! Hermione shouted as they caught sight of the gargoyle guarding the headmaster's office. Jelly Belly! Daphne said, and the gargoyle leapt aside, allowing them to pass by. The 3 of them hurled themselves up the stairs and into the office, before collapsing in exhaustion upon the floor. Fawkes, the headmaster's phoenix, trilled a soft song, that effectively eased their worries a bit, and helped them to relax enough to take stock of their situation. Where's Tracy, and Astoria? Neville asked, noticing for the first time that they were short a few people. What happened to McGonagall? We ran into a bunch of those bastards, and she told us to run. Hermione said. We got separated from Tracy, she told us she would catch up. What happened to you? Neville looked at himself and noticed for the first time how he must look. Clothing torn and singed, hands bloody. He looked up at his girlfriend's concerned cinnamon brown eyes, and tried to smile as if he had just come in from a fine walk in the woods. I met Robespierre Lestrange. He was a bit upset with me, but I imagine his brother's going to be even more angry with me, especially after he finds his brother. I ran into a few more Death Eaters. One of them was Parkinson. Pansy. Daphne looked up, still breathing hard from all that running. She tried to get me in a body bind. In fact, everyone I encountered tried to take me alive. No one threw anything more dangerous than a cutting curse, really. What did you do? Hermione asked, hanging on his every word. Well, Pansy's going to have to learn to write left-handed, and there's a Death Eater who's going to be envied by any witch on a diet. Other than that, I just ran here. What are we supposed to do here? Daphne said, getting shakily to her feet. She had never been in the headmaster's office before, and at the moment, it was the last place she wanted to be. She knew it was only a matter of time before they were discovered, and she had no idea if Harry or Dumbledore were on their way back, nor did they have any means to warn them. All of her worries went out the window when the door burst open, and the three teens brought their wands to bear on the intruders. I assure you that we come in peace. Dumbledore sighed, clutching at his chest, and heaving himself towards his desk, nearly knocking Daphne out of his way. Where's? Daphne never finished her question as Harry came in just behind the headmaster, and grabbed his girlfriend, pulling her tightly to him. Please, we have very little time. Dumbledore said, though his voice sounded quite weak. He motioned for the four youngsters to join him on the other side of the desk, before he stumbled over to his familiar's perch. Fawkes, it is time, my old friend. The phoenix gave a soft trill and vanished in a flash of crimson flame. Dumbledore turned back to the four teens, and very clumsily stumbled back to his desk, where he picked up a silver teapot, and handed it to Harry. That is a timed porte-carte. It will take you to a safe house where further instructions await you, he said, struggling to breath. You're coming with us, Harry said, handing the porte-carte to Neville. We've got to get you help. Dumbledore shook his head. My journey is at an end. I am so sorry for everything. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, but fate had other ideas. Remember all you've learned, and trust in each other. I am very, very honored to have known you, Harry. Sir. Harry's voice caught in his throat. Harry, it's activating. Daphne said, grabbing his arm. Harry, ask Sirius about his brother. Dumbledore said quickly. Sir Harry said again, looking at the headmaster, a man whom had done so much to try and redeem himself in the course of the year. His attention was caught by a flurry of movement behind the slowly sinking old man. Dumbledore turned to see what Harry was staring at, as well. Avada Kedavra. Harry had no time to react as he felt Daphne's grip on his arm tighten, and Neville grabbed the back of his jacket, while something was shoved into his back. He saw the dreaded green light, and then the world spun away. It was a very strange sense of foreboding that not felt as he lay on his bed, staring at the map he had stolen from Harry Potter. He'd been memorizing the map for weeks now. Learning every secret of the great castle, all in preparation for the moment when his dark master would finally take over. Nott was wondering where it was that Potter and Dumbledore had gone to when they had disappeared off the map. They had been gone for 2 hours, and he had been watching the map diligently for their return, as well as keeping his eye on Longbottom, who was in the library with those traitorous girls. Greengrass and Davis, as well as the Mudblood. His master was most pleased that he had come into possession of this map, and had, according to Lestrange, been most eager to examine the map himself. He had seen Lestrange only the day before, when he'd finished repairing the caved-in passageway. It had been then that Lestrange had tasked him with watching Longbottom carefully. He had made it clear that he should know exactly where the boy was. Not knew it was not a problem, thanks to Potter's map. He had also been given another task, one that he hadn't even expected. A task that had kept him awake all night, thinking about. Not knew that his master's siege was to happen soon, and he had known that there would be help from within the castle itself, though he had no idea who the other Death Eaters were. Well, almost no idea. There was a couple of people who were all but flaunting their allegiances. He had noticed both Crabbe and Goyle had bore the mark on the arms the other day when the two goons had finished their showers. The idiots hadn't even bothered to hide the mark at all. If their master knew of their lack of secrecy, they would know severe pain, as not had no Draco had experienced. That memory still made him smile. He had just been marked and masked when Draco was brought before the Dark Lord, and punished for his obvious failings in accomplish the task he'd been given. Not didn't know at the time what that task and really had no interest in learning it. He had his own job to be getting on with. He sat upright on his bed quite suddenly as his arm burned. He clutched it tightly, trying to stop the searing pain shooting up his arm, when the door to his dorm burst open and both Goyle and Crabbe came stumbling in, and going to their trunks. The two hulking boys began throwing on black robes that Not recognized at once. The battle was about to begin. Glancing at the map, Not saw that both passages he'd told Lestrange about was now clustered with names, all moving towards the castle. He leapt out of his bed, and opened his own trunk to don his robes. Both Crabbe and Goyle stared blankly for a moment, unsure of what their roommate was doing, until they saw the ornate silver mask in Not's hand. Yeah. Goyle grinned, slipping his mask on. Let's kill some fucking mudbloods. Crabbe chuckled. Not followed his two roommates out into the common room, where a number of others, all wearing the masks and robes of their order, were gathering. There were also a number of Slytherin students staring in horror at their fellows. Not had known there were other Death Eaters within the school, but he was genuinely surprised by the number. Over half of his house were gathered in their garb. Not didn't understand why there were so many, or why the Dark Lord would allow people so young into his ranks, unless they were simply sheep for the slaughter. Anyone who wishes to live, said one of the bigger robed figures, should stay here, or fight with us. Those who remain here will go before the Dark Lord. With that, all of the robed figures poured out of the common room to take up arms against the teaching staff, and anyone who resisted. Not straggled behind as they marched, overwhelmed suddenly by what it all meant. Many of his fellows were likely to die, and it was very possible that he would be one of them. Not stayed with the group until they got to the Great Hall. He then remembered that he had two jobs to accomplish, and he had left the key to them both on his bed. Going back for the map, Not was able to miss the first bit of fighting, when Aurors, who had been stationed at Hogwarts, tried to subdue the junior Death Eaters. There were shrieks of surprise when Not burst into the common room once again. He simply ignored them and ran into his dorm, and snatched up the forgotten map. A quick scan showed him that Longbottom was still in the library. All he needed to do was find Lestrange. Abe, Dumbledore gasped, clutching his chest. We need brooms. Harry watched as the man called Abe gave a very disapproving look before turning and stomping into the Hog's Head. Harry was about to question Dumbledore regarding his clearly ailing condition when the old man cut him off. "My brother," Dumbledore said weakly, looking to Harry. "He and I have never seen eye to eye. Not since we were young men, anyway. But there is very few people I trust more." Harry nodded, not really listening to the headmaster. It was everything he had not to just start running towards the castle. They had failed to get the Horcrux in the cave only to return to Hogsmeade and find the dark mark hovering ominously over the castle. He had no way of knowing what had happened, or if in fact it was still taking place. His friends were there. They could be fighting Voldemort's forces or they could be. He refused to allow himself to think on it. "Here," Abe snarled as he shoved two ratty-looking brooms out. "They're old, but they'll do the job." "Are you sure about this, Al? There's gotta be another way." "Abe," Dumbledore smiled, though it was clear he was suffering serious pain. "It is one of my deepest wishes that things between us had been better. I must finish my journey. I will tell them that you miss them." Abe nodded, clapping his brother on the shoulder. Albus mounted the broom and urged Harry to do the same. "We are going straight to my office, Harry. Do as you must to make sure we are unimpeded in our journey. But keep close to me." With that, Dumbledore kicked off the ground, followed closely by Harry. Normally the feeling of the night air on his face as he pushed a broom to its limits would be thrilling and exhilarating. Tonight, however, Harry was immune to it. He had only one focus. He needed to find his friends and make sure they were safe. Dumbledore sat down right in front of the gates, with Harry right on his heels. They pulled their wands, and ran as fast as they could up to the castle. Harry kept pace with the headmaster who was clearly struggling to remain standing. Yet, the headmaster managed to surprise Harry when they met the first resistance at the entrance hall. A group of Death Eaters had apparently been stationed at the great doors to prevent people coming or going. What truly surprised Harry was the size of the Death Eaters. They were all shorter than he was. Harry took up his wand, ready to start throwing curses, when Dumbledore's hand came to rest on his shoulder. "Students," Dumbledore said, making a slashing motion with his wand, bowling all the robed figures over. "Students." Harry looked appalled. "How can they be students? Did you have any idea they had taken the mark?" "I did, but I could not check them, any of them," Dumbledore said guiltily. "People have rights, Harry. Without cause, I could not violate students' privacy unless I could prove they posed a threat." The headmaster sounded very tired as he spoke. And his face looked very old as he approached the now unconscious junior Death Eaters. Harry glanced at one whose mask had fallen away and recognized her as a fourth year. His anger boiled hot at the sight of the girl. While he understood Dumbledore's dilemma about being able to check students, it didn't change the fact that he and the rest of the student population had been walking around for months while young killers in training and been entirely unaware of it. "Come, Harry. We have little time," Dumbledore said, fighting to remain on his feet. Harry and the headmaster slipped into a hidden passage, narrowly avoid a group of Death Eaters coming down the grand staircase. "Why would Voldemort use children?" Harry asked, trying to fight down his anger. "It doesn't make sense. Voldemort has no regard for life, other than his own. The children are simply a means to his end." Dumbledore wheezed, leaning against a wall for a moment. "They are merely a new batch of easily manipulated sycophants, brought up by their own parents to believe that his way is the right way. Another tool for his use." "It's disgusting," Harry growled and Dumbledore nodded. "Especially when you consider that they will make great shield for him." Harry looked up with horror in his eyes. Most people will not initiate an attack against children. It will allow his forces to gain the upper hand in any fight. Harry clenched his teeth in anger. The arrogance of the Dark Lord in using children as nothing more than human shields. And what was worse, those children were so blinded by their dreams of glory and power that they had no idea of what their choice to follow the Dark Lord truly meant. Dumbledore stared at Harry with a heavy heart. The battle had come, just as he knew it would, but he had never thought he would be so weakened. He only hoped that his orders were being carried out. He had called Hagrid, Severus, and Minerva to his office before he had left with Harry. It had been difficult to get them to understand, and only Severus agreed right away. "It is my belief that this castle will come under attack before the night is through," he had told them. "Hagrid, I need you and your brother to hide in the mountains. It is of great importance that you remain hidden until the time is right." "But how will I know?" Hagrid asked, looking to Snape and McGonagall. "Someone will let you know, my friend. For now, it is important that you survive." Dumbledore turned to his other two teachers. "The safety of the students is paramount. You and the other teachers must get them all out through the emergency passages. But you cannot start until an attack comes. Any sign that we know of their plans, and the consequences will be dire, I fear." "Can't we get them assembled?" McGonagall asked. "I'm afraid not." Dumbledore shook his head sadly. "I fear that there are students loyal to Voldemort within the castle. We cannot risk any of them getting word out. You must appear as if you are ignorant of any threat. If he even feels that we know of his plans, we will suffer greater losses. While I do not believe he will kill children, as they are far more useful to him alive, I do not wish to give him the chance to even consider it." McGonagall looked as if she were about to argue when Dumbledore cut her off. "But if an attack is coming, why not keep Hagrid here?" McGonagall asked. "Surely we could use him to assist in keeping the Death Eaters at bay." "That's right. Me and Grop would be quite proud to defend the school," Hagrid said proudly, puffing out his vast chest. "I truly admire your courage, and your desire to protect the school, but the odds are not in our favor this time. We must yield to them for now, but it is only temporary, I promise you both." Dumbledore looked very sad at having to order the practical surrender of the school. But the safety of the children was far more important. "Gather the teachers and the prefects, and alert them to what they must do, but tell no one else. Position them all close to the houses, and any place where students might be in preparation for a mass evacuation." McGonagall stared at Dumbledore for several moments, looking as if she wanted to argue. Eventually, she slowly nodded, and agreed to carry out Dumbledore's request. "There is one other thing that must be done, and it is of the greatest importance," Dumbledore said after McGonagall had complied with his wishes. "Should an attack occur, it is vital that Mr. Longbottom, and Miss Greengrass, Granger, and Davis are brought to this office straight away. They will be safe inside until I return to get them out. I cannot begin to stress how important that task is. Those four students must be kept safe." "I don't understand." McGonagall looked very confused. "Why those four?" "It isn't important that you understand, only that those four are kept safe. They will play vital roles in the future, and without them, and young Harry, I fear for the end of our world, as we know it." "It will be done, Headmaster," Snape said. "It is McGonagall that I wish to see this task done. Severus, you have another task I wish for you to complete." Snape's eyes narrowed at the insinuation. Dumbledore didn't have time to try and ease his young friend's conscience over what he had been asked to do, but Dumbledore knew that there would be no dignity or mercy should Voldemort be the one to end his life. At least with Snape, it would be quick, and there would be no gloating, or great presentation of the corpse. You have your assignments, and now, I must finish mine. He felt terrible saddened that those would be the last words he would ever get to speak to either of his most trusted, and revered friends and colleagues. What was worse, was that he knew he would never have an opportunity to remedy that. But it was out of his control now. He needed to do what he had set out to do before he was forced to pass on the quest to young Harry. "We must get to my office," Dumbledore said, taking a deep breath, steeling himself for the next part of the journey. He had to get Harry to his friends, and get them all out of the castle. The preparations were already made, he had simply to get Harry and his friends together. Harry jogged alongside the headmaster as they made their way through the passage. Harry heard small, distant explosions. Dumbledore gave a heavy sigh. "I ordered that the students be helped to escape," Dumbledore said weakly, knowing that Harry was looking at him for answers. "I only hope that the teachers manage to get them all out of the school." "They will," Sir Harry tried to reassure the headmaster. Dumbledore nodded at Harry's words, and they pushed on. They emerged from the passage, and Dumbledore looked about to make sure they were alone. When he was sure, Dumbledore slowly led Harry out into the open and together they headed for the stone gargoyle that guarded the entrance to the headmaster's office. Theodore Nott had seen very little in the way of battle. He had followed the map and located Rudolphus Lestrange to inform him of Longbottom's location. Rudolphus had a mad gleam in his eye as he and several other Death Eaters followed Nott through the castle chasing the little dot with Longbottom's name on it. At one point, Rudolphus' brother, Robespierre, appeared to have cornered the squib. Then, Longbottom's dot began moving again, and Rabastian's dot remained still, and then slowly faded off the map. When they came upon the scene, Rudolphus let out a roar of bloodlust at the sight of his brother's body, slumped against the wall. He and the Death Eaters ran down the hall, all but forgetting Nott, who had suddenly been entranced by two new dots on the map. Quickly, he turned and began running in the opposite direction. Nott arrived in time to see the stone gargoyle jumping back into place in front of the entrance to the headmaster's office. He had seen Potter just as the gargoyle returned to its place as guard. Nott knew he had no hope of learning the password, so he did the only thing he could think of. Reducto. A large chunk of stone was blasted off the statue, which remained for the most part, standing defiant. Nott threw more blasting hexes, destroying the gargoyle a piece at a time until finally, nothing remained. Nott chuckled at his work, wondering why no one had ever thought to do that before. Nott tucked the map into his robes, and clutched his wand tightly. He needed to move quickly. He could not allow anyone time to retaliate. Taking a deep breath, Nott ran up the spiral stairs and kicked in the door to Dumbledore's office. His wand was up taking aim, and he shouted the words that would end the life of the greatest wizard since the great Merlin had walked the earth. Avada Kedavra. There were screams of outrage from the many portraits, all shouting their anger at the assassin. Dumbledore's face looked shocked. Surprised that it was a student, a mere sixth year, who had killed him. Dumbledore slumped onto his desk, and slid down upon the floor. Nott then looked up and saw that Harry Potter was there. Nott knew he was not allowed to kill the Gryffindor golden bastard, but he could capture him. His wand rose again, but to his great disappointment, Potter, and the people he was with, disappeared. No! Nott yelled, lunging into the room, as if he could bring Harry back. He fell to his knees on the spot, pounding his fists on the floor in anger. He had failed to capture Potter. His master would be very displeased at his failure, and Nott feared that there would be a Cruciatus curse in his future. Then he turned and saw the foot of Albus Dumbledore from behind the desk, still lying where he'd fallen under Nott's wand. He began to smile. He hadn't failed at all. He'd done as he'd been told and killed Dumbledore. Not stood, coming around the desk again to look upon the body of the greatest wizard of all time, chuckling at the ease in which he'd been killed. And then he really looked at his handiwork, and he felt suddenly cold and empty. The full weight of his actions began to settle in on him. His stomach gave a lurch as he stared into the now vacant empty blue eyes of Albus Dumbledore. He still wore the look of surprised recognition upon his ancient weathered face, and not felt as if someone had walked over his own grave. He ran a hand through his hair, and tried to turn away, but his eyes were locked with Dumbledore's, and he was overcome by a strange feeling, one he'd never felt in all his life. Footsteps sounded in the stairwell, and not turned as Professor Snape appeared in the door. The former potions teacher stared silently at the body of Dumbledore, and the Death Eater standing over him. There were no signs of anyone else in the office. "Well done," Snape said evenly. "The Dark Lord will be most pleased with you. You will be rewarded above all others. And I will see to it that you get all you deserve. Reveal yourself to me." Nott removed his mask, and Snape had to fight not to reel in shock. The boy's eyes looked red, and misty. He turned back to stare at the headmaster's body. Snape entered the office, and bent down to inspect the former headmaster's body, sliding his long fingers down Dumbledore's face and closing his eyes. He had failed to do as he had promised. It was not him who ended the great man's life, but a child. A child whose soul was now broken. Pushing all of his guilt aside, he rose again to look at Nott. He still had a part to play, and so far as he knew, Harry Potter was safe. So long as the boy was safe, he, Snape, had to remain ensconced in Voldemort's inner circle. He would have to remain the spy, and do his best to aid the boy when he could. It was the only way that he would be able to eventually find his own end. Come, the battle is over, and the students that didn't get away are being taken to the Great Hall for his arrival. You must be there so he knows that you have done what no one had been able to do before. Nott nodded, and with Snape to guide him, left the office of the headmaster. Snape allowed himself one last glance to the man who had played so prominently in his own life. He vowed to that memory of Albus Dumbledore that he would see Lord Voldemort's life ended, even if it took his own dying breath. "No. No!" Harry shouted as the office vanished in a swirl of color. He and the others had been portkeyed away. When the spinning stopped, Harry found he was in a very dark room. Harry fell forward as the arms grasping him let go. "Harry!" He heard Daphne's voice from somewhere beside him. There was a sound like something bumping into a table, and trying to keep object from falling on the floor. Harry scrambled to his feet once again, ready to defend himself and his friends. "Lumos!" Neville's wand lit the room slightly, and Daphne grabbed Harry in her arms. She began to cry in earnest now, clutching him close as if he might vanish if she didn't keep a hold of him. Harry began to relax a bit as he wrapped his arms around the shaking form of his girlfriend. I thought she began to speak, but her storm of emotions prevented her from continuing. "He's dead," Harry said weakly, and he and Daphne sank to the floor. "He's dead. I'm so sorry." Hermione sniffed as she sat down next to Harry and Daphne. Neville also sat down, wiping at his eyes. They were all beginning to feel the full weight of what they had all experienced, yet none of them seemed to be able to form the words to express their feelings. "He knew he was going to die tonight," Harry said, his voice hardly a whisper, though it was quite loud in the dark silent room. "He said goodbye to his brother. He said goodbye to me." He looked at Neville and Hermione, who both looked very tired, and saddened. "Did you do it?" Hermione asked softly, tears falling from her eyes. "Did you destroy it?" Harry slipped his hand between himself and Daphne and retrieved the fake locket from his pocket and handed it to Hermione, who looked frightened by the thing. "It's a fake," Harry said sourly. "Everything he did was for nothing, and now—" "A fake?" Hermione asked, picking up the locket, still looking at it with trepidation. "But, where's the real one?" Harry shrugged as Daphne sat up to look at the locket in Hermione's hands. "Where's Tracy?" Harry asked. Daphne looked up at Harry, her eyes filling with tears again. Harry pulled her close, feeling as if her look of despair was answer enough. Hermione's eyes fell, and she began to cry once again. It was Neville who spoke, finally giving Harry the answer he felt he already knew. They got separated while heading to Dumbledore's office. He said. Astoria was with her. Harry felt his chest tightened. Tracy and Astoria. Two people who had come to mean so much to him. Tracy was Daphne's best friend, and Harry knew well the value of a real friend. He had lost his own best friend less than a year ago. Had it not been for Astoria, Harry wondered if he and Daphne would have come together at all. She had pushed for them to just kiss, and let things be what they would be. She felt that he and her sister were overthinking things, and had gotten overly involved in their budding relationship. "Where are we?" Neville asked, looking about the dark room. "I don't know," Harry said. "But I think we're safe for the moment." "Should we try and find out?" "No," Daphne said through her tears, gripping Harry's jacket in her hands. "Can't we all just stay here? Let's just stay until it gets light, and then we can look around. Please." Harry looked at Neville, who appeared to be settling in his position with Hermione in his arms. He looked at Harry as if to say that given all that had happened, perhaps it was best. Slowly, Harry nodded, and tightened his hold on the girl he loved. They held onto each other, trying to find a small bit of comfort after what they had seen and lost this night. They all felt their eyes grow heavy as they heard the very calm, soothing sound of Phoenix song seeming to come from all around them. Harry's heart felt heavy, and he felt like he needed to do something in retaliation against the Dark Lord. But now was not the time. He was hurting, as were his friends, and they needed each other. Revenge could wait until they were more prepared. For now, all that mattered was that they were alive and together. Tomorrow, they would declare war. Please like and subscribe.